it, so I'll post that in the notes about the annotated bibliography. And Tanisha, what are you looking at for your topic? Much detail as you can give us about what you're thinking.
My topic is about if like marriage couples, like how long they'll last through the marriage, I guess, something like that. I still haven't found like a good title, just trying to like figure out the title.
That's okay.
Like how,
Title is the last thing. Don't worry about that. So what do you guys think? She's looking at marital longevity. Do any of you have any ideas for her about factors that might contribute to making a marriage last? Or do you have some ideas about it that you want to share with us?
Like stuff that help it last. So like communication.
Communication, I think, yeah, like maybe communication skill. Is that something that you're thinking about for like an independent or influence variable, Tanisha?
yeah, I have like, I don't know, like 2 articles, but one of them's like about the divorce rates and marriages rates, and the other one's about the effect of on marriage and health.
On marriage and health?
Yeah, the health, yeah, the effects of marriage on health symptoms.
Ah, it sounds like you're building a case. Like you're building a case that your topic is important, right?
Yeah.
That marriage contributes to higher health, especially for males, I think, right?
Yeah.
And that marriage rates are what, around 50% success, something like that?
Yeah.
Something around there. So right there, you have some good start for building the case that your topic is interesting and relevant. Very good. That's, I think, how they're going to be useful to you. But are you interested in predicting whether a marriage is going to be successful?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of I think you and am I right, Tanisha? You and I talked about the scales that measure like the we, like the number of times that people say we when they're talking about their relationship or how they approach problems.
Yeah, I think we did talk something about that.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay. So I guess starting to figure out what your question is going to be important. Do you have a specific question?
No, I haven't like found one, like a good one yet. I keep like thinking of a different one, but I don't write one yet.
You're looking at predicting marriage longevity, I think, right?
Yeah.
So you could just write that as your first draft of your question. What factors predict how long a marriage will last? And like Arnisha said, maybe communication is one of them. So you could look up communication and marital longevity or something like that.
Okay.
Or divorce, you could look up the opposite. Do any others of you have ideas of factors that contribute to a relationship lasting, a marriage lasting?
What kind of commitment
marriage not lasting?
they make?
Yeah. Leah just joined us too.
Hello.
Hi, Leah. We're looking at Tanisha's idea. She's interested in factors that predict whether a relationship will last, whether a marriage will last specifically, or whether it'll end in divorce. And communication was Arnisha's thought. So, all right, well, I wonder what the impact of children is. You could hypothesize that having children causes the relationship to last longer for the sake of the children, or that the various strains of having children cause it to last shorter, right? I mean, I don't know. Possibility? Money? Losing job is a big stressor on a relationship. Money problems? could be a downside causing it to not last.
Maybe a question of how does cheating like how cheating gets a person to divorce, I guess, like faster.
Yeah, fidelity or infidelity. What factors allow a marriage to get through infidelity? Yeah. Like some marriages there can be that experience and the marriage survives. These are the ways we can help each other. You know, if we just give some time to thinking about each other's ideas, we can really get everyone's ideas richer. You might need to look up, Tanisha, divorce instead of marriage longevity. Like that might be the more common words you find. And then if you look up factors that contribute to divorce, your question could be the interesting one. It's opposite. Then is the, you know, to what extent is the opposite true? I kind of wonder about family support too. Like, how much does your family support your relationship? So those are all some questions we have. So Arnisha, we're going to ask you to tell once again what you're doing, and I want you to tell why you think it's an important question. I asked you that in my response to your assignment. I know.
My question is, does music or no music affect your motivation? I changed it. Motivation and painting.
Yeah,
That's my question.
A nice little experimental paradigm. And so the question that I have for you is, why is this an important topic? I'm not saying it isn't, but you're the one who has to make the case that it is.
I'm just curious. I don't know.
Okay. Can any of the others of you think of a reason why it might be important to answer the question of whether having music in the background helps people's motivation in their, let's just say their art class painting, so people don't get confused with painting a house? Does it help them feel motivated in their painting, which is Arnisha's interest? Can you think of any reason why it might be good to have an answer to that question?
Maybe it provides a relaxing atmosphere.
Okay, so that might explain if it proved to be helpful, but what if we're saying, who cares? I'm not saying that much. I'm just saying, what if someone is listening and says, so what? Why is this important? Why does it matter if music helps with motivation?
There's also a study about how music does relax a person before, I guess, you know, they're studying.
Yeah, that might be a foundation about the physiological effect of music. But still, we're not getting to the question of why is this like relevant or important? And I mean, can you think of any potential benefit? Like, what if you're an art teacher?
Maybe other like people can use it
Yes, how so?
to maybe just to I don't know, maybe they can just like try it out and see if it works for them.
Okay, there's no evidence that, so who might benefit from this study? Unmotivated art students might benefit, right?
Mhm.
But we might generalize to them because maybe they'll say, well, maybe I'll put some music on and I'll get my work done.
Yeah.
Or an art teacher who wants the students to be motivated might find it useful. So here we talk about this little discrepancy here. I'll share my screen really quick between basic and applied research. So what Arnisha proposed is basic research. Research that does not have an immediate, obvious application. So does music help motivation? So this is called basic research. And that who cares question is always possible. But if we don't have answers to this type of question, we don't get innovations in the classroom. And so what she has to do to make her process meaningful is she has to imagine an application. So applied research would be, so basic research is just answering questions that don't impact real life. But the next step from basic research is applied research, which is research that directly is involved in real life. So for example, she does this basic research and let's say she finds out, yeah, we have these randomly assigned groups, the ones that have the music, maybe painted for longer or whatever it is, however she's going to measure it. That's a last week question. But now we have this applied research and we're going to have, say, an art school trying it in different classrooms. And now we have an application. Now we have a school who's trying it in different classrooms and they're going to see if this makes a difference and maybe they'll have more motivated students. Or maybe someone else will come along and say, if this helps art students, maybe it helps psychology students who have to do a lit review too, you know. I'm going to try that, you see. So this answering this basic question is important because of the potential applications to education, I would say in this case. That's what I'd say. I just want to take a minute and go back to Tanisha before we, and I have a lot of content for you today, but I want to go back to Tanisha. So Tanisha, what I was wondering is, you're interested in addiction. Can any of you who are here think of a question that you might have about addiction that might help Tanisha to narrow down her idea?
That one's to me, Chastity.
Chas, I'm sorry, Tanisha, my apology. I knew that. So Chas, anyone who can help Chas narrow down her topic a little. She's starting with addiction, but it's just too broad. And then she limited a little bit to generational addiction. Can anyone think of a research question that might relate to generational addiction? Just off the top of your head, something you've wondered.
What does that mean?
Well, go ahead, Chess, and define generational addiction.
Well, in my family, they suffer from alcohol addiction. And it's been going on for, I guess, generations after generations. That I'm trying to figure out, you know, like why it happens. And I know they say it can be stopped, but yet it'll stop with one generation and it'll move on to the next generation again. So I'm wanting to know, like, how, I guess, it goes from generation to generation of addiction.
Okay. Now, my guess is, before I ask the rest of the class, my guess is that if you typed this search into, let's say, an academic database, if that's where you're starting, that you'd find articles that produce some pretty good answers to this question. So this might be a starting place for your search. because at the end of any article that you find that answer these questions, you'll find suggestions for future research, questions that haven't yet been answered. So, and it's really hard, by the way. I don't mean to be like not hearing the difficulty that must be in play when you're dealing with, I mean, it must be really painful watching relatives suffer. So, you know, so maybe the consequences, maybe a question that you might have are, what is the impact of generational addicted on non-addicted family members, or something like that might be of interest. So I'd say you might want to start there. Causes of generational addiction might be a good search term. And now back to the question I originally asked. Do any of you have any questions that you would find interesting, just to broaden some thinking on this?
I have a question. So like back, like you could use like history wise, like didn't it all start off with like when they started giving like the settlers gave us like alcohol and stuff back then. That's when it started. Wouldn't that be a good research too to look up also, or no? Like going back to history.
That's a really good question. So very often when we're interested in a topic and we go online to search out the answer, we're calling that research. And it is a type of research, like in the human, you know, if this isn't yet known, we might go back into archives and look it up if we don't know the answer. But when you're looking up something for which there's already an answer, that's, for our purposes in this class, that's not what we're considering research. What we're looking is for you to answer a question that nobody's yet answered. It's that hard. So that's what we mean by research in this context. So while that is a type of research, like looking up information and compiling it to answer a question that interests you, here in this class, we're looking for you to put together a proposal for gathering new data to answer a question that, as far as you can tell, has not yet been answered. So the background might be of interest to your audience, you know, especially if you're focused on the history of addiction and Native peoples, then just highlighting a little bit of the background would be of interest, but it wouldn't be the thrust of a research study for our purpose.
Would it be too broad if I included like a psychological study of, you know, why people are addicted to like substance, or is that a little too broad and not narrowing down my topic still?
Well, I think you're going to have to do two types of narrowing. One is what type of substance. I think that really the reasons for addiction to different substances vary. So you're going to have to choose what substance.
Okay.
I don't know, you know, maybe you have reason to think that that's not accurate. Like maybe your own experience living with people who are addicted suggests to you that one addiction, many addictions, maybe that's it. But in that case, you have to build that case for us. So I'd recommend maybe if it seems relevant to you to vary it down, to narrow it down. And then when you said why people are addicted, do you mean why they chose that substance, like substance of choice?
Yes, because I've heard people say that it helps them to think better, it numbs the pain, it helps them to sleep sometimes. And like, I always ask myself, why that substance? So isn't it there like medication that can also help with that? But instead they choose something that's addictive to where, you know, it helps them with their everyday life.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. I don't know if it's too broad, but so like, does intergenerational eviction, can that be a question?
Yeah, hard one to answer though, right? How would we answer that? I mean, and like here, I know that all of you know more than I do, but among Navajo people, the historical trauma runs across everybody, you know? Like, so are we talking about individual historical trauma, like, say the people who were in the potato famine, or like my grandma, for example, her family was killed and she was on a cattle car being hauled across Europe, you know, during the time of the world wars, and, you know, so that's a personal trauma, you know, so we're talking about probably collective historical trauma, similar to what's happened to so many Native people. Yeah, it seems like it would be a speculative question and not one that we could answer by collecting data. And back to your question, why are they choosing the substance instead of a prescription? If you decide to go in this direction, Chas, you'd be doing a descriptive study. So you'd be simply, I'm guessing, you wouldn't be doing an experiment. You wouldn't be comparing any two groups as far as I can see. So all you'd be doing is, let's say, probably asking people what substance they use and then why they use it and why they don't get a prescription instead. And it's sounding to me a bit like a qualitative study, but there might be some way that we could quantify it. But it's not exactly a quantitative study, but we might be able to work with that. You can keep reading and see if anything that comes clear to you, comparing two groups or something, like why people choose this. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So hang on, I have a chat here. Yes, I can repeat the questions. You probably can't hear Anisha here in the classroom, I'm guessing. Thank you.
Yeah, you're kind of low and I have to turn my volume all the way up.
Am I? Let me see if my mic has any weird adjustment on it. Seem like there's any strange volume thing going on, so I'll do my best to get closer here and see what I can do. All right, so we have a few ideas. We're just mulling them over. This is a good place to be right now. And Leah, are you interested in getting some feedback from the group on your idea? Or are you wanting to just sit with it a little bit on your own first?
I think I'm, hello, everybody. I think I'm stuck. I've been thinking about my topic and so let me think some more. I'm trying to figure out how I can come up with a good research question, because I don't know that it'll be, that I'll be able to, well, let me explain. My understanding from the videos that I've watched is that when you're doing a research question, you, to get a valid one, I guess, you really can't, there are certain ways to think about it, and you really can't like say, well, can I, let me ask you this, let me say, ask it that way. Maybe not interviewing the young girls in high school, but maybe college age girls between maybe 20 and 25, and see if they feel like, if they've, number one, had their Kinatha ceremony, And then number two, to see how they have, they feel that it has impacted your life. Now, if I do that, I'm going to get all kinds of answers.
Mhm.
So that's where I keep getting stuck.
Well, this is a beautiful question. Allow me to answer it in this way, because I think it might be relevant to others of you. So as people in, I'm just about to share the screen here. As people in psychology, we like words. We like the actual stories, and we like to treat people with the respect of finding out in detail what's going on with them. And so your idea of interviews, your question sounds to me like, let's see. What are the long-term, let's say long-term 25, that's 10 years, long-term benefits of participating in CANALDA? And you can state this. If there's a better way to state it, you will do that. And what I would recommend, based on what you suggested, is that you use what's called a triangulated approach. That means it's also an example of a mixed method. So your interviews would fall here. You want the whole story. You don't want to just have numbers. You're not getting as much rich information, and you want rich information. But your interviews are with a small sample of the larger population. And for the larger population, you get written responses. You have a questionnaire. And included in the questionnaire, you have your own predictions of what might be impacted. So you have a well-being that's impacted. A woman I worked with last term thought that that menstrual pain would be indicated. And you don't just write your own surveys on these. You use validated scales. So there is actually, I can share with you, a valid scale of menstrual pain. There is a valid scale of well-being that I can provide you with. And you think about the ideas that you think might be impacted, and then you include them on a questionnaire, and this is with a larger sample. And maybe there's some other way that you want to probe this question as well. Maybe a focus group, something like that. When you get all of this text from your interviews and you transcribe it, means putting it into writing, then you would end up coding it. Meaning you go through all of it and you pull out themes that seem to emerge, common factors, and then also unique experiences. And this would be a narrative text. Now remember, in our class, you're not conducting this study, you're writing a proposal. But to write a proposal that has this triangulated or mixed method approach is a really fine way to do it. And here is your answer, and you have answered it in several ways instead of just one way. So you're kind of getting different methods of getting at the same question. For our class, this piece would be what we're looking at. But I think choosing a subset to interview or have focus groups with is a really, really nice clarification. What do you think? think, Leah, or anyone here about this mixed methods or triangulated approach?
I like it. I know that it's going to entail a lot of, getting the sample group. I have to be, I have to figure where that's going to come from. Is it going to be the students there at the college, or where, which group will I be looking at?
And
And then,
that is the topic for today. So, yeah, maybe it'll give you some thoughts, because for our next class, I'm asking students to examine that a little bit. Does anyone have any thoughts for Leah? Any of you like things that, I know last time, I think respect for tradition or something like that is what Arnisha said. Any of you have any thoughts on what the benefits of Canalda ceremony are or would be if you didn't have one? Chas, or you're still here with us? Chas or Anisha? Yeah. Anything? It's really important that we help each other. So even if it's someone else's idea, we can all benefit. Like this triangulated approach, you should all know about this. So. Okay, so last class we talked about measurement. I made recordings. So what you're counting or measuring that you think depends on something else. So in Arnisha's case, she is measuring motivation. So the best way is never to make up your own scale. It's a big process to validate a scale. And if you use an invalid measure, then your whole study, your internal validity is really threatened. So she needs to look up and find a validated scale that she thinks accomplishes what she wants to accomplish. She might also have another measure of motivation, though. And it might be how long they work. So she might have two ways to measure motivation, and that is length of concentration. Right, so we talked about that last time. So it sounds like Leah is going to be finding a way to measure whatever she thinks is impacted by Canalda, right? Canalda. So I don't know what that is, but we suggested well-being. And I suggested menstrual pain. These may not be the ideas that interest her. Tanisha, for whatever study she conducts, is in some way, what do you think you're going to be measuring, Tanisha?
I think it'd be like sort of divorce rates.
Okay. Maybe it's best to have what's called a continuous variable. So maybe it would be years of marriage as one possible variable. I don't know. I'm trying to think of how you would do this. Or maybe divorce is just a yes/no question. Or maybe it would be something like marital satisfaction. There are scales for that. But anyway around it, you're going to need to figure out what you're going to be measuring, what you're actually going to be counting, and how you're going to count it. when I said continuous variable, this is what I meant. Divorce, it's yes, no, right? That doesn't give you rich data for your dependent variable. But years of marriage, well, there can be, 0 if it breaks up within the first year, up to, 75 or 80, right? But that might be tricky because of the ages of the individuals. I mean, so these are some ways to think about it. Does that make sense, Tanisha?
Oh, yes, it does.
Yeah, good. And so some things to think about. So I'm going to jump into some new content now related to sampling and population. And I'm just going to contextualize it a little bit. Chas, I think you're not quite to the point of getting your independent variable yet, or your dependent variables, so I didn't touch on yours just now. I think my screen is frozen here, so let me see if I can unfreeze.
Dr. Rose, I have a question. I was trying to find that video where you made reference to our examples. It was the Kinagda, and then also that young gentleman's project. I was trying to find that video for some reason. I can't find it. Did you remove it?
I didn't remove it, but I didn't remove anything, but did you see it at some point, or do you just remember it?
It was in one of your presentations that you had us view on, I guess I'll have to review all of them again because I just have to, I don't know if anyone knows right off where you were using those as examples. And that towards the very end, you use his example and yeah.
So sorry, I don't remember myself. It would be better if this wasn't such a long class because we could chop this up and save these things. I did that one time and it was so much work for me that it was just too much. So I didn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a little hard that way. That's why I'm trying to record these mini lectures so that if there's just one thing that you have to learn, you can look at a mini lecture and learn it. And so at least then they're shorter, but those I do at home. It's harder with the full class. I find myself forgetting to turn it on and off. And so I've decided not to continue to try doing that. So let's jump into this though. I already posted the slides for this and this should be a question for you. Imagine that you've cooked this pot of pinto beans and you did it from dry beans. Okay, and they're simmering, simmering, simmering. These are starting to look done. So how are you going to sample? How are you going to like test your beans to see if they're done?
Taste one.
Or you're going to taste one? Yeah, for sure. Just one. So you're going to like put your fingers in there and take
Maybe
just
a
one
couple.
bean. Couple.
Because
Okay.
some might not be all fully cooked.
Okay.
Or you could feel how soft it is.
Yeah. So where are you going to get that bean from? Right on the top of the pot?
I would stir it.
I think I'd stir it too. Now, this is my next question while we're waiting for this to come up. Why would you stir it?
So that you could get a good sample.
Oh, so we could get a good sample. I like that. Yeah, what happens if you don't stir? Are you thinking, Leah, are you thinking that in some way the beans on the top of the pot might potentially be different from the beans in the middle? What, how so? How might they be different and why?
Maybe the bottom might be more cooked than the top because it's like pot or it's like closer to the pot. I don't know.
So the beans on the bottom are having a different life experience than the beans on the top.
I don't know, maybe.
And they might be different in some way. I think you're right though, right? Especially if you didn't stir them at all. The beans on the top might be a little dried out. The beans on the bottom might be a little burned. Possible? There's a reason I'm asking this, and I think that my computer is freezing out here. So don't tell me that these beautiful slides I spent so much time on, I'm not going to be able to put them up for you. And I'm fearing that this is going to be the case. This is craziness. All right, let me try to get out of this one last time, and then I might have to give up. See, it doesn't even show that it's trying. Oh, I've never had that happen before. See if we can just open that. Okay, well, what a darn shame. You guys might be stuck with my handwriting because I can't even open PowerPoint. In what way have I offended you, computer? All right, I'm going to try to stop the share a minute just in case that has something to do with it. And then I'm going to share it again. And this beautiful work is frozen up. So I'm going to use whiteboard. All right. So we have talked about how we need to make sure, so this content today is on sampling and population, and the beans were relevant. I had much prettier pictures. All right, and so just to give you a little context for it, that is done in your book, sampling is really important when we're using descriptive techniques. So the example that we gave is Chas's study, and was it Chas's? Yeah, Chas's study. Am I right about this? On addiction, yeah. And she was just wondering about why people use certain drugs, and she was going to do a survey to find out. So if she does that, it's a descriptive study. And one big problem with this kind of surveys relates to this idea that we talked about last class when we talked about measurement, and we're going to talk about again here, and it is validity. But this time, it's not the validity of the tool, it's validity of the study. We've talked about this a little before. Does the study test, I'll just use the word test, what it claims to test? And we talked about that, you'll remember internal validity. Is it a good study? We talked about internal validity, and those are the characteristics of a study that allow you to draw conclusions. And we talked about external. And that means that you can generalize. And you've had a lot of content on this already, so I won't belabor that. And so one thing, especially in descriptive studies, that makes it a good study is the sample, the sampling method. And we'll talk about why this is important to internal validity. By the way, the slides that I'm talking from are, I've linked to them. So you might be able to open them even though I can't. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about today. And the very first thing that becomes important is to define your population. A few of you began to address this, like Leah said, for example, she didn't know if she was going to be using, say, women who were students at Dene College. Her population is probably, I would guess, I think you're probably interested in Navajo because Canalda is specifically a Navajo ceremony. So you're interested probably in Navajo women. What age group would you say? 10 years after their Canalda, so women between 20 and 25? Navajo women between,
I think they have to be teens.
well, to have the ceremony, but if she's looking for the long-term impacts, she's gonna look for women 10 years later.
Yeah.
So maybe 10 years after the ceremony. So that would be her population, right? So this, to draw an analogy, no offense to all these women, but metaphorically, let's liken them to this pot of beans. I had that pretty picture, you all saw it. There's the pot of beans, okay? Now, if we don't stir the beans, we just get the beans on top,
Yeah.
we're not getting a good sample. So, you know, this was the idea of that bean metaphor. Which ones are we taking? We're gonna stir the pot first. And that's so we get what we call a representative sample. Now, so this is her population. She might be narrowing it down more. So this is the population, all the possible women, all possible Navajo women between 20 and 25 are her population of interest. She cannot possibly find all of those women. So what she's gonna need to do is get a sample. Select an appropriate number of women to represent all Navajo women. Now, I should have cleared my screen first, and I didn't. So I'm gonna run into space issues. Let me see here. Lasso and delete it. Okay. I've had more tech problems in our class. One more lasso and delete, and then I'll have space to continue. All right. So the best way to sample, the way that's equivalent to stirring the pot of beans, is random sampling. So random, your book calls it proportional. Random is the more common word. Random sampling or random selection. And that quite says everyone has an equal chance of being chosen. So every single Navajo woman between 20 and 25, that's the population, has an equal chance of being chosen. Now that's hard because in order to make that happen, you have to first get a list of all the women in this age group who are in this population. So maybe they're registered somehow in charters, maybe such a list is possible. Challenging because you need to identify all members of the population. Can you see how that would be hard? Do you know if there's a list of all Navajo women between those ages? I don't even know if Leah's still with us. She has another class. Let's talk about this anyhow. So, do you think there's such a list, you guys? You are all women. Do you think somewhere there's a list that has your name on it as a woman and knows your date of birth? Arnisha thinks no. Tanisha, Chas, what do you think? Are you guys still here?
Yes.
Do you think there's that list somewhere? Like if someone wanted to get a list of all Navajo women between the ages of 20 and 25, they could?
Yeah, wouldn't our, what is it called? CIB, our CIB have that? Yeah, like our census thing.
Are those like, what's CIB?
It's like our number to clarify our
Yeah.
identity.
Of Indian blood, yeah.
Yeah,
So would it have like your date of birth?
Yeah.
yes. It has like pretty much our information on it.
Okay,
They like sometimes they'll also send through the mail. Like I get mail for puberty and
oh, you do?
just like voter stuff, something like that from the CIB office. I don't know
Okay.
if they would do that, but I'm thinking that they do.
Beautiful. So this would be this. So if we were going to do simple random sampling and we have this as our population, these Navajo women, we would have simple random sampling is one type of random sampling. So simple random sampling. So the first thing we do is we define our population. We've done that, although I think we might want to have maybe only women living on the Navajo Nation, because that might make a difference. But we'll define the population really clearly. Then we have to get a list. So we have to identify every person in the population. Every member of population. Then we have to use a randomization method to select them. So usually that would involve, you could do it by putting every single one of their names in on a bingo ball or something like that, and choosing a bingo ball, or putting all their names in a hat, that would be one way, but we typically don't use that. So we use randomization to select a sample. And we usually use something like this. We take that list that we got and we give every single one a number. And we, so everything was linked in my random selection generator. And then we go ahead and a random selection tool. Let me try one more thing here. All right. Anyhow, there are lots of ways to do it. I can do it really easily in Excel, but what we do is we just generate a list of random numbers. Here we go. Here's one. And so if the lowest number, there are 100 women total, and that's all there are, women in that age group in the Navajo Nation, then we just generate random numbers. And so the woman who got the number 65, she'd be on our list. The woman who got the number 75, she's on our list. The woman who had the number 34, she's selected. And we keep doing this until we had women selected at random. Okay? And that's how we would do it. And then we would persistently make sure that we do all we could to encourage those women to participate if they were willing. But we have to be persistent, because if they don't, if there are some women who participate from that beautiful random sample and some who don't, there might be some inherent difference between them. So a problem if some don't participate and others do, there might be a systematic difference between those groups. Like maybe the ones who didn't participate are the ones who are having a lot of problems. And so then we would have a non-representative or a biased sample. Responders and non-responders. So, for example, this is called non-response bias. Have any of you ever filled out those comment cards in a restaurant? They're sitting in the center of the table sometimes and you can fill it out. Or you get course evaluations that you can complete each semester. Maybe sometimes you complete it and sometimes you don't. But usually if you're likely to complete it, it's because you're unhappy or really happy. And so it's those who don't respond are the ones who are just in the middle. And so we have a biased representation. That's what this is. So that's a problem. So you have to really encourage that particular randomly selected group to participate. And this is the equivalent of stirring the pot of beans.
What does that say after this?
Between responders and non-responders.
Oh, okay. Between.
I abbreviated. But the problem is of not having the slides. Here, I can clean up this word too.
Yeah, that's the one I couldn't read.
Oh, yes. All right. So you get that idea of this non-response bias. So like that's why when you get the census, like they bother you to death until you complete your census form. I mean, have you guys had those at all? Yeah, you should, or at least each household. Yeah, and so they want to have representative samplings. I'll make sure everyone is counted. So sometimes, though, we want to use something called stratified sampling. So let's imagine that in this case, since we're staying with Leah's example, even though she's gone, let's imagine that she has a reason. Is Leah back?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Hi, I'm back.
Okay, we've been talking about your case all along.
Yeah, I don't know.
For you?
I guess it must be my internet that's going in and out.
Oh, I'm just glad you're back. We were defining your population and then talking about whether we could identify all of them. So we thought you were probably interested in all Navajo women between 20 and 25, that was your population or your pot of beans. And that it would be possible to get a list of that from, was it CID, Chaz? Is that what you said?
CAB.
CIB?
Yeah.
That you could get a list of all those women and then use a randomization process to select a sample. But then you would have to really encourage those who were selected to participate, because if they don't participate, you might have a systematic difference between responders and non-responders, which would be non-response bias. So
Okay.
that would be the ideal way, especially in a descriptive study. But sometimes we want to stratify. What that means is, let's say that you had a reason to believe that there might be differences between women who lived in, let's say, off the Navajo Nation and women who lived on the Navajo Nation. And so would women who lived off the reservation be on that CIB list? Probably, right?
If they're Navajo,
They're Navajo, but they don't.
I don't know if it's only Navajo. If I have that, I think so.
Okay.
We have probably.
That might be a way. That would be the researcher's job to find out. But let's say she had a reason to believe, let's say that people who lived in Window Rock would be different in some way from people who lived in Chinle, would be different in way from people who lived in more rural areas. So she wanted to make sure that she had good representation of each of these groups in particular, because this was part of her hypothesis. She would want to do something called stratified sampling, which means she's going to figure out what proportion of these women, of all of the women, are in Window Rock, or in other words, the number in Window Rock divided by the total. That would give her a proportion. She would figure out the proportion living in Chinle, and she would figure out the proportion living in neither of those places. And once she knew those proportions, and she knew how many she wanted in her sample, she would make sure that when she got that big list that we did right here in number 2, she would identify and identify the Window Rock group. She would identify the Chinle group, and she would identify the rural group. And then she would randomly select from each group. According to the proportions, so that her sample represented this population, but she wanted to make sure to have proportional representation from these different groups. So that's how she would ensure that. Still a good sampling method. Or she might do something called cluster sampling. And this would be, let's say she wanted to go to chapter houses to recruit her women. And so cluster sampling would mean that she was going to divide, all of this is on the slides too, so. Let's say that for her, all of the clusters were going to be the chapter houses. So let's just say cluster sampling is randomly selecting clusters. So let's say that the place that had all of that list of women were chapter houses, and she had to go to each chapter house to get their list of women. And it was sort of a lot of work. And so what she would do, instead of sampling each individual woman, putting all their names in the hat, she would randomly select chapter houses. And within those chapter houses, she would get the women and include all of those women from each chapter house she selected. Does that make sense, this cluster sampling and the stratified sampling?
So what we will run into with this kind of obtaining information is in their records management policies. So they're not able to release, I know for a fact, they're not able to release names and addresses. So even from the chapter house, that isn't allowed because of the, what is that, law regarding records management.
HIPAA violation.
HIPAA, not only HIPAA, but there's another records management policy the nation has.
Yeah,
So-
so I don't think anything, I mean, as far as HIPAA, to just get a list of the names would not be a violation of HIPAA because you're only asking for their ages, you know, they're not even their date of birth, but just their year of birth. So that wouldn't be HIPAA, but if there are other regulations related to the Navajo Nation, that could be another issue. Sometimes though, with permission for research, there's a Navajo Nation Research Review Board, and perhaps something like with their permission, you would be able to. But you're simply proposing a study here. So, but that would be well worth knowing. It's a very good question for work here on the Navajo Nation, indeed.
Yeah. I know that I since I work with the chapter houses, I've come across these. The community health representatives work closely with the chapter houses, and when COVID was happening, we wanted a list of names of the COVID patients because we wanted to be able to serve them properly, and for our safety, know who we were around. You know, the family clusters, they wouldn't even release that to us. So even just the names and, you know, their location, they would not release any of that to us
Yes.
as chapter staff, even though we worked right there in the community with these people, they wouldn't do it. So yeah, I can probably work with the review like that.
Yes. Yeah, the information about who had COVID probably would be a HIPAA violation. So that might have been part of a piece of the reason, but there might have been more too, and that must have been really hard, Leah, working in that circumstance.
Yeah.
Information, very scary, and I'm sorry that happened to you. But let's assume that it can't be done, that the best way can't be done, and you need to resort to haphazard sampling. And that has a few different types. One is convenient sampling. So if you were to ask, say, the women in this class to participate, and the women in your other classes, asking women you know. It's convenient, right? But because you would be getting a biased sample, you'd be getting, first of all, it's unfortunately biased because you'd be getting women you know, and if you stayed at DC, you would be getting, say, educated women or women perhaps with higher levels of education. You'd be getting people who happen to be taking courses in your area, so they share your interest. You'd see it would be a little bit of a biased. It's not that you can't do it though. A lot of studies end up needing to do this sort of thing for just the kind of reasons that you're describing. But it's convenient. Asking women you know, or asking people who are close to you. So here's you, the researcher. Let's put you in red, the researcher. And here is your population of interest. All of these are women that represent the population of interest. And you're only choosing these women who are like within your circle. So represented in green here, these are the only ones you're choosing, the ones who are in some way close to you. And so you're missing all of these who might some way be different from you.
Yeah.
One kind of haphazard. Another way, but it's still done. Sometimes we have to. We can't always have perfection. Another way of sampling would be snowball sampling. And it involves asking, let's say, this can be a valuable way if you're looking for people with a specific characteristic, like a rare disease or something. You're studying this disease, and so you would, if you know someone with a disease, you would ask them. So here's you, the researcher, and you know someone who fits the criteria, and so you ask them about it, and you ask them to ask people they know, and they know 3 more people. And similarly, they ask, I'll just do circles now, and each of these knows a couple people. And because it's a rare disease, it's hard to find people. And so this is a way that can sometimes be effective. It's called snowball sampling because it gradually, your sample grows bigger and bigger, as you can see here. And so, why this keeps doing that. So that's another possible way of sampling. So I'll just write that down there. It's asking one person who fits the criteria for your population. Who asks others, and so on. A third way is just voluntary responses. That is, you send out an email to everybody, and whoever responds, responds. You can see where the bias might be in that. We have another risk of non-response bias here. Meaning that those who don't respond are different from those who do. So maybe people who have a lot of time because they're retired respond to your survey. And people who are just bored respond. Non-response bias is the risk. And people who are retired, bored, highly interested, respond. And people who are different from them, people who are busy, not interested, don't respond. But this is a difference that can be like an extraneous variable, like these are two different groups, and so you might not be really representing the population. But that might be the way you need to go. So this is the kind of decision you'll be making. Another thing to think about, what questions do you have about these, a few examples of types of sampling?
I'm sorry, repeat your question.
Do you have any questions about any of these sampling methods that I've kind of outlined here? Number these so they're a little more clear. This is number 1. of the random methods. This is number 2, and this is number 3. So the random methods are, you can make Leah or Nisha?
It's making sense to me. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna have to record this anyhow, I'm using the slides, but, so you'll have a different way of having this presented, but these are some main things to think about. Now, the first thing for all of you to do, and I'm asking you to do it in this week's Think, is to define your population. And you might think this is really easy, but defining the population is going to include a couple of components. So what you think about is this. So let's go back to our pot of beans, just by way of a nice metaphor. So here's our pot of beans. And here's our beans. And you've stirred the beans, which is the equivalent of random sampling. So you've randomly sampled the beans. And you've tasted them. So here's your little sample of beans that you've tasted. Now, if you taste this little sample of beans, you don't really care about them anymore. They're already contaminated because you put your mouth on them and you've eaten them, they're gone. But what you're interested in, so you drew these beans from the sample, but what you're interested in is generalizing back to the pot of beans. So you're assuming that if you stir and taste and you get a random sample, this bean was chosen, this bean was chosen, this one, it's a random sample, that you can generalize back to the population. Back to the plate of beans so that you don't have to eat every single bean to know if the beans are done. All right. So when we think about our population, we have to be really clear on what we mean. So who do you want to generalize to? So in Leah's case, she wants to generalize, probably draw conclusions about Navajo women in general. Because if she can, she has a good random selection and she does a well-designed study, then she can maybe build the case of the importance of the ceremony, which could make a difference. There's her application. So who does she want to generalize to? Well, probably all Navajo women. We've already talked about, her sample, all Navajo women aged 20 to 25, and maybe even living on the reservation. Maybe that's the sample. We're going to come to someone else's work in a minute here. We're almost done. But she also wants to define exclusions. Who should not be part of this sample? And when you people who might be harmed by participating in a particular way, people unable to provide accurate data for some reason, so perhaps she would want to exclude, using this last category, maybe people who have severe mental disability, cognitive disabilities like Down syndrome or something like that. Maybe those shouldn't be a part because maybe, I don't know if this is true, this is Leah's to think about, maybe people with Down syndrome, maybe. Or maybe because it's going to be a written survey, she would exclude people who don't speak the language. Or maybe she'd have her form translated and that would be okay, you know, but maybe they're all decisions that she has to make. So I'm putting question marks here. Maybe, depending on the question she's gonna ask, maybe women who have had sexual trauma. Or who are depressed. Maybe in some way they would be harmed or produce different results. Okay, so these are things that she's got to think about when she defines her population. So thinking about who the population is, what the exclusions are, and then how she's going to sample from that population. So now let's think about some other populations. We chose hers, I chose hers because it seemed easy to work with. But Arnisha, you're sitting here right in front of me. What do you think your population of interest is? Like an age, gender, are they Navajo? Not? What do you think your population is?
Maybe college students.
Okay, college students. Does it matter if they are like traditional students around your age or non-traditional, like much older, like more like my age? Does that matter?
No.
Okay, college students of any age, does gender matter?
No.
Okay, do they have to be taking an art course? Or would you be
You
using
don't
just
have to, just
anyone?
anybody
Okay.
who like paint.
College, does it matter if they're freshman, sophomore, junior, senior?
No, as long as they paint.
So they have to paint. So you're not going to gather them and assign them to a paint condition and a no paint condition. But they have to have, how much background in painting? How are you going to define they paint?
Wow. If they show an art piece, would that be one?
So here, ooh, you have something to think about here. What if you assume, what if you just want to, yeah, so, I mean, you're gonna have to get sort of a homogeneous group. Do you guys have any thoughts about Arnisha's idea here? She's saying that she wants to use just people who paint, but how would she screen for people who paint? Could you do a survey and ask them if they paint? For what? How could we define?
It can't be like voluntary, right?
Well, no, I mean, you're just getting the list of people. I mean, you're just telling what the criteria are. So don't worry about voluntary or not voluntary.
Okay.
So how are we going to define they paint? Denisha, Leah, Chess, if you guys have any ideas, just weigh in here. We've got to help each other.
Maybe.
Would it, like, could we do like random or no?
Well, yes, but first we have to define our population. So who are we interested in? And so far she's got college students at any age, but she wants them to paint. So we're trying to figure out how to define they paint. They have taken a painting class at Dene College. They,
Yeah, taking at least one painting class, but then I feel like there could be people who paint without taking that class.
all right, so what are we gonna do? Oh, we have a problem here, don't we?
Yeah.
How are we gonna define people who paint? We just have to define them. We don't have to worry about finding them yet. All we have to do is define what we mean by they paint. They like painting, they
Just have
report.
any kind of experience with painting.
Okay, who have experience with painting now, you mean painting like on canvas, right? Not houses?
Yes.
Who have, that's good, we could screen for that. Who have experience. Now, is there anyone who's going to be excluded?
People who don't paint. That would
Yeah,
screen.
they will. So you've already
Yeah.
screened for that. But anyone else among these people who have experience painting, is there anyone who shouldn't be a part of your study? For example, someone who's attending college here, but they're a professional artist. I'm just asking, should they be excluded for any reason?
No.
Okay. People with any sort of condition or disability, anything? You're gonna have to think if there are any exclusions. People who would be.
Remember that article that Joanna found where people paint without, where they had disabilities and they were painting without arms? Like
Yeah,
painting?
yeah,
So I was just like, oh, no. Yeah, I
beautiful.
think disabilities.
People who, I mean, presumably, are you talking about DC college students specifically?
I would just say anybody.
I mean, but realistically,
Yeah,
you
College
want college
students.
students, but it seems unlikely that you could get,
yeah.
it seemed you might need to just start with DC college
Yeah.
students. Okay, you might need to. Maybe you'll get if you get a colleague, you could use their college too. You'll have to just think about if there would be any reason someone couldn't participate. What if they had a hearing problem? What if they could not hear, they were deaf?
Also, no.
Okay, so exclusions might be people with hearing impairments, right?
Or maybe, yeah, never mind. I was gonna say, or maybe they can be the one with no music, but they're kind of already used to.
But that's unfair because that, you have to use random assignment.
Yeah.
So you'd have to exclude people with hearing impairments. It's not that you don't want them, it's not that you don't care about them, it's that they can't participate, literally. They're unable to provide data because they can't hear the music. All right, on this note, it's time for us to wrap up our class. So what you have for next time, I'm going to record the lecture on the slides I couldn't show you, but you got most of it right here. I don't think I missed anything too much. And you have a think assignment where you're asked to define your population and your exclusions, and then to describe how you might sample. And so you don't have to stay with it, but it's your first run at thinking about these ideas. And then you have just one practice quiz today. And that's what I have for you. Thanks for coming. Do any of you, is this a good time for the 4 of you who are here? Because we can stay with this time if this is nice for you.
I'm fine with it.
Okay.
So am I.
We'll see how it goes. I keep worrying a little bit about this, but all right, everyone. See you next time then.
Have a good day, everyone.
You too. I'll go in there.
I'll go in that.
Go in there.